I collect and play a Middle-earth strategy battle game, and over the years I have accumulated a pretty large collection of Lord of the Rings miniatures. My collection means I'm able to field most armies in the game, however the problem is most of these armies are still in boxes. In order to combat my backlog, I've decided that this year I'll be bringing a random army to every tournament I attend. To do this, I'll be using a random picker wheel which I'll spin 3 times. I'll then select one of the choices and that'll be the army that I bring to the tournament. This tournament was the Irish Masters, and it was a 777 point event that required both a good and an evil army. My spins for good army were Army of Thror, Return of the King, and Defenders of the Hornburg. For evil armies, my rolls were Moria, the Black Gate, and Azog's Hunters. For my good army, I went with Defenders of the Hornburg, taking Hera, Alwyn, Leif, and a Captain of Rohan. I then took a third Riders, a third Warriors with Throwing Spear, and a third Normal Warriors. This event also allowed you to customize an unnamed hero, so my Captain of Rohan had the One Final Blow special rule. He could also call a Heroic Strength for free every turn and acted as a banner for his warband. For the evil side, I went with Moria, mainly as I had already painted Moria Goblins for episode 1, and this would minimise my painting. It would also be the last event before the February FAQ was in play, so it would be my final opportunity to try Double Dragon with Breathe Fire before the nerfs to Breathe Fire. So my list was 2 dragons with Breathe Fire and Fly, a load of Moria Goblins, and a Black Shield Captain with a load more Moria Goblins. As my dragon was an unnamed hero, I was able to give them custom rules, so they took a rule where they could deploy where they want in Maelstrom, a rule that made them a banner, a rule that allowed them to reroll courage checks, and a rule that removed stock on scene. So with the exception of 3 Riders of Rohan that I'd previously painted, I had the entire Rohan list to paint. I started by airbrushing the cloaks Elysian Green and applying a highlight with a dry brush. I then applied a thinned wash of Athonian Camoshade. I then base coated all of the other cloth areas using brown, red and tan. To make the browns look like worn leather, I dry brushed these with an off-white. I then applied a thin glaze of snakebite leather contrast paint. I then blocked in all of the metal areas using lead belcher and applied a black wash. To finish off the models, I painted the gold areas, the whites on the shields, and the flesh and hair. Finally, I used some of Geek Gaming's Scenic Spacey materials and added some white flowers to represent the flowers that grow on the tombs of Rohan. I then painted all of the riders using the same scheme. And finally, all I had left was to paint the heroes. So it was a bit of a slog to get through that many models, but in the end, I think the army looks great. Onto my evil army, and I had 2 dragons to paint. I already had a dragon that was about 3/4 finished, so I just finished up with some extra highlights and used this frost effect on the base. I wanted the second dragon to be the opposite of the first dragon, so this dragon would be red and it would be on a hot lava base. It was now 11 PM, the night before the tournament, so I had just a couple of hours to get this done as quickly as possible. I started with underpainting by dry brushing white, then applying contrast paint through an airbrush. I dry brushed on some orange highlights and then broke up the reds by airbrushing on some black. I then moved on to the base and I did my best to make this look hot and glowing. Started with white ink through the airbrush and then added on various oranges and yellows. So it's not my finest work, but it was now 2 AM and I had a lift to Dublin at 6 AM, so it'll do for now. So after the long drive to Dublin, it was time for the tournament in Game 1. In this game I'd be playing my good list and I'd be up against Usurpers of Edoras. The scenario was to the death, which meant most points would come from killing your opponent's army. This was a pretty bad matchup for me as my opponent's army all had the keyword Hatred for Rohan, which meant they would be gaining +1 to wound against my models. My plan was to use my range advantage and scoot and shoot using my bows and throwing weapons and not engage until I had to. When the lines finally met, I was able to use the terrain to mitigate some of his numbers. However, he was able to get an early wound on my leader with his +2 to wound, combining the Hatred for Rohan and the army bonus that gives +1 to wound against heroes. This game was super close, right up to the last turn. However, a leader kill secured me the victory and I won 11-9. On to game 2, and I'd be playing my evil army against Radagast's alliance, and the scenario was Stake a Claim. In this scenario, you score points at the end of every turn by holding objectives. This was another bad scenario for my army, as in my experience, if you're not on the point from the first turn, it's really hard to catch up. Therefore, I'd be unable to sit back and breathe fire with my dragons, which is the main strength of my army. I did move one of my dragons half and was able to get a breathe fire off, killing Radagast's eagle. From here on out, it was really a case of whoever won more strike-offs would win the game. On the left, my ice dragon was fighting Gwahir, Radagast and an eagle, and in the centre, Bjorn was holding up another dragon with an eagle. Because my goblins were able to take the right flank, it became a case of whoever lost the first big hero was probably going to lose the game. It was my dragons that fell first, and in the end my opponent won 12-0. In game 3 I'd be playing my evil army again, and this time I'd be going up against Men of the West and command the battlefield. In this scenario, the aim is to have more models in each quarter of the battlefield than your opponent. I deployed my warbands first, and my opponent brought his warbands on close. However, a bad roll with his eagles meant that the eagles were deployed on the far side of the board. I moved both of my dragons on half so that they could breathe fire in the first turn, and I moved the rest of my goblins onto the far side of the board to capture a different quarter. I moved both of my dragons on half and both were able to breathe fire in the first turn. Both breathe fires went off, and this was pretty devastating for my opponent, probably killing over a third of his army in the first turn. Aragon and his troops were bogged down in a fight with my leader dragon, and I was able to breathe fire from my other dragon into this combat and kill another large chunk of his troops. On the next turn I decided to breathe fire into this combat again, as it had the potential to end the game and I was in a winning position. In what was a pretty hilarious moment, my dragon breathed fire and hit the combat. However, Aragon survived, but my own leader took a wound and failed his fate, and with no might left, I killed my own leader. This mistake cost me the game in the end and I lost 10-7. However, this was genuinely one of the most fun games I've had in a long time. My opponent was absolutely great. On to day 2, and I'd be up against Smaug, and the scenario would be Seize the Prizes. In this scenario, the aim is to collect 3 prizes in the middle of the board and get them off your opponent's board edge to score maximum points. Under normal circumstances, I'd be pretty confident that I could win this scenario against Smaug, as he is just one model. However, the special rule for this tournament meant that Smaug could take a custom hero from a different list, and he took an Orc Captain on Warg. This meant that he would be able to pick up 2 objectives from the first turn rather than just 1. As well as fighting a massive dragon in this game, I would also be fighting an even bigger hangover, as I stupidly went to bed about 2 hours before my game was supposed to start. Roll-offs didn't go my way this game, and Smaug and his captain were each able to get a prize on the first turn. I committed a lot of my army to hunting down the captain to try and get the prize from him. However, I lost a lot of roll-offs and was unable to catch him before he handed the objective over to Smaug. I did get one of my prizes off the table, however I was unable to stop Smaug getting off with both his prizes, and I lost 11-7.
On to game 5, and I'd be up against Depths of Moria, and the scenario would be Divide and Conquer. The scenario involves holding 2 side objectives and a centre objective, with the centre objective being worth more points. This was pre-FAQ, so the Depths of Moria list is arguably the strongest list in the game at this point, and this was going to be a tough game. My opponent sent the Balrog straight to the centre objective, so I decided to ignore the centre objective and focus on the side objectives. Eventually, my opponent sent the Balrog to the right hand objective, where Hera would tank him for the next 5 turns of the game. As the final turn approached, I body blocked the Balrog off the centre objective. I also pulled a sneaky dismount with my cavalry to get through a gap and contest one of the side objectives. This was a very tough game, but in the end, it was a 4-4 draw. Game 6, and I was up against the Return of the King, and the scenario would be Fog of War. In this scenario, you have to pick a target to kill, a target to protect, and a scenery piece to claim. I picked the King of the Dead to kill, the far right ruin to claim, and a Goblin Captain to protect. I completely underestimated the speed of this legion, and they were up in my face from turn 1, before I even had a chance to breathe fire. This game was super close and had lots of epic moments, like Legolas killing both of the dragons. However, in the end, I was able to protect my target, kill my target, break his army, and kill his leader to win 15-7. So in the end, I finished in 11th place, which is my worst performance of any tournament yet this year. However, it's probably also the most fun I've had at a tournament, especially my games against the Return of the King and my game against Men of the West. Importantly, I did come away with something, and I picked up Best Painted for my armies, meaning this is the second Best Painted I've won this year. There's now 3 weeks to the next tournament, so join me in episode 5 for what may be my biggest project yet.